Chosen one, if you have been sensing that something connected to the letter J is changing, slowing down, becoming distant, or suddenly refusing to move the way it once did, do not panic. You may be standing in a moment where God is asking you to release what you desperately wanted to keep. What feels like rejection may actually be protection. What feels like silence may actually be direction. And what looks like a closed door may be the mercy you prayed for without realizing it. Do not force what God is removing. Trust that He sees what you cannot see yet. Chosen one, there are moments in life when you can feel a change before you can explain it. You notice the atmosphere is different. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly suddenly become strained. Someone who used to respond quickly becomes distant. An opportunity that seemed almost guaranteed begins to disappear. A connection that once felt meaningful starts requiring more effort than it ever did before. And somewhere deep within you, there is a quiet realization that something is ending. You may not have the full explanation yet. You may still be asking why. You may still be wondering what happened, what changed, or what you did wrong. But listen carefully, not every closed door is a punishment. And not every ending is a failure. Sometimes God closes a door because He knows what is waiting on the other side of it. And this is why you must be careful with your next move. Do not force it. Do not chase it simply because you are afraid of losing it. Do not beg for something to remain simply because you remember how beautiful it once looked. Do not keep knocking on a door that God may be intentionally closing, just because you are uncomfortable with the silence behind it. There is a difference between perseverance and resistance. Perseverance is continuing when God has told you to continue. Resistance is continuing because you refuse to accept what God has already changed. Chosen one, you have to learn the difference. There may be something connected to J that has occupied your thoughts more than you want to admit. It could be a person, it could be a relationship, it could be a job, an opportunity, a location, a friendship, a plan, or something you associated with that initial. And perhaps you have been trying to understand why the energy around it feels different. Maybe you have prayed about it. Maybe you have asked God for confirmation. Maybe you have told yourself that if it is meant to be, it will work out. But then you find yourself trying harder and harder to make something happen. You send another message. You make another attempt. You explain yourself again. You give another chance. You wait another week. You tell yourself that tomorrow will be different. And yet the door keeps becoming heavier. Chosen one. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is not pushing harder. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is stepping back. There are doors you should knock on. There are doors you should walk through, and there are doors you must have the courage to leave alone. You cannot call something destiny simply because you desire it. You cannot call something divine simply because you became emotionally attached to it. And you cannot assume that because something once worked, God is obligated to keep it in your life forever. Seasons change, people change, assignments change, paths change, and sometimes God changes your direction without giving you the entire map. That can be difficult for someone who has spent years trying to understand everything before taking the next step. But faith does not always come with explanations. Sometimes faith looks like saying, God, I do not understand why this is ending, but I trust you enough not to interfere with what you are doing. That sentence can change everything, because when you stop fighting the closing door, you finally have enough peace to notice the door that is opening somewhere else. And perhaps that is what this season is really about. You have been staring at one door for so long that you have not noticed another one beginning to open. You have been looking backward so intensely that you have not recognized what is forming ahead of you. You have been asking God to restore something that He may be asking you to release. And I know that can hurt, because sometimes you do not want a new door. You want the old one to open again. You want the person to come back. You want the opportunity to return. You want the conversation to happen. You want the apology. You want the explanation. You want the ending to change. But what if the ending is not supposed to change? What if the ending is the answer? What if God has been protecting you through the very thing you have been calling a disappointment? Chosen one, there are things you will understand only after you have walked away from them. There are situations that will make sense only when you are far enough away to see the entire picture. There are people you will eventually thank God for removing, even though you once begged Him not to. There are opportunities you will eventually realize were distractions disguised as blessings. There are relationships you will eventually understand were lessons disguised as promises. And there are doors you will one day look back at and say, "Thank you, God, for not letting me enter." Right now, you may not be able to say that. Right now, your heart may still be attached. Right now, your mind may still replay memories. Right now, you may still wonder whether you should make one final attempt. But before you do, stop, breathe, pray, and ask yourself a different question. Not, "How can I make this work?" Ask, "Why am I trying so hard to keep this alive?" That question may expose something deeper. Maybe you are not fighting for the connection itself. Maybe you are fighting against the fear of being alone. Maybe you are fighting against the fear of starting over. Maybe you are afraid that you will never find something better. Maybe you believe this was your only chance. Maybe you have attached your identity to the outcome, and that is exactly where you need to surrender. Because God does not need you to manipulate circumstances to accomplish what He has for you. You do not have to chase what is yours. You do not have to convince what is aligned. You do not have to beg what is ordained. And you do not have to destroy your peace trying to preserve something that God is removing. Chosen one, hear this clearly: forcing a door does not make it your door. You can push, you can pull, you can knock, you can cry, you can negotiate, you can make excuses, you can create opportunities for another chance. But if God has decided that the season is over, your effort cannot turn an ending into a beginning. And perhaps you have been exhausted because you have been trying to do exactly that. You have been carrying something that was never meant to be carried this far. You have been praying over something that may require release rather than restoration. You have been asking God to give you strength to keep holding on when He may be giving you strength to let go. There is a difference. Sometimes the blessing is not in getting another chance. Sometimes the blessing is having the courage to stop asking for one. And if this situation is connected to J, do not become obsessed with the letter. Do not turn every name beginning with J into a sign. Do not become anxious, suspicious, or consumed with trying to decode every coincidence. The message is not about becoming fearful of a letter. The message is about becoming sensitive to God's direction. If something connected to J is naturally closing, allow it to close. If a person named with that initial is becoming distant, do not automatically chase them. If an opportunity connected to that initial is disappearing, do not assume you must force it back into existence. Let God reveal what the situation actually means through time, wisdom, peace, truth, and circumstances. You do not have to manufacture a prophecy out of every event. You simply have to remain surrendered. Because the enemy of peace is often the need to know everything immediately. You want answers now. You want confirmation now. You want to know whether they will return. You want to know whether the opportunity will come back. You want to know whether the relationship was real. You want to know whether you should wait. But sometimes God does not answer those questions immediately, because the answer would tempt you to stay attached to something He is teaching you to release. Sometimes uncertainty is the space where surrender grows. Sometimes silence teaches you what constant communication never could. Sometimes distance reveals what closeness concealed. Sometimes absence tells you what presence was hiding. And sometimes the closed door becomes the clearest message. Chosen one, do not mistake emotional intensity for divine confirmation. Something can feel powerful and still be wrong for you. Something can feel familiar and still be unhealthy for your future. Something can feel impossible to release and still be something you must release. Your emotions are real, but they are not always instructions. Your longing is real, but longing is not always guidance. Your memories are real, but memories are not always promises. You can miss something and still move on. You can love someone and still release them. You can appreciate what something meant to you without demanding that it remain part of your future. That is maturity. That is surrender. That is faith. And perhaps God is bringing you into a season where you no longer need to chase what requires you to abandon yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to convince someone to choose you. You no longer need to compete for a place in a room where God is preparing another room for you. You no longer need to hold on to what constantly makes you question your value. Chosen one, understand this. A closed door does not mean you are rejected by God. It may mean you are being redirected by God. There is a huge difference. Rejection says, you are not enough. Redirection says, this is not where you are meant to remain. And sometimes you interpret redirection as rejection because you are looking at the situation through the eyes of your disappointment. You see the loss. God sees the destination. You see the goodbye. God sees the beginning. You see the empty space. God sees what can now be placed there. You see what disappeared. God sees what can finally arrive. This is why you cannot judge the whole story from one chapter. You may be in the chapter where everything feels uncertain. You may be in the chapter where plans are changing. You may be in the chapter where someone leaves. You may be in the chapter where something connected to J suddenly becomes distant. But the chapter is not the whole book. Do not make permanent conclusions about your future based on temporary pain. Do not say, nothing good will ever happen again. Do not say, we'll never find someone like this. Do not say, that was my only opportunity. You do not know what God has prepared beyond the door you are grieving. And that is the point. You are being asked to trust what you cannot see. Maybe you have been waiting for God to give you a detailed explanation before you let go. But what if God is asking you to let go before He gives you the explanation? What if understanding comes after obedience? What if clarity comes after distance? What if peace comes after surrender? There are some answers you cannot receive while you are still clinging to the question. You keep asking, why did this happen? But perhaps the next question should be, What is this making room for? That question shifts your perspective. Suddenly, the closed door is not only about what you lost, it becomes about what you are being positioned to receive. You begin to see that God may be removing distractions. You begin to see that certain connections were consuming energy you needed for your assignment. You begin to see that certain environments were keeping you small. You begin to see that certain relationships were making you compromise your peace. You begin to see that certain opportunities were attractive but not aligned. And slowly, you realize that not everything that leaves your life needs to be chased back into it. Some things need to stay gone, not because they were meaningless, but because their purpose was completed. Chosen one, this is where many people make the mistake. They experience the closing door, become afraid, and immediately run toward it. They call, they text, they apologize for things they did not do. They lower standards they once promised themselves they would keep. They accept treatment they know is beneath them. They convince themselves that anything is better than losing the connection. But fear should never be your decision maker. Fear says, hold on because you may never have this again. A faith says, release it because God is not limited to this. A fear says, what if this is your last chance? A faith says, what if God has something beyond what you can imagine? A fear says, you need them. A faith says, God is enough. And that is the shift you are being invited into. You are being invited to stop making decisions from scarcity. You are being invited to stop believing that one person, one opportunity, one relationship, one door, or one season contains your entire future. Your future is bigger than what is ending. Your purpose is bigger than who walked away. Your calling is bigger than one rejection. Your destiny is bigger than one closed door. And your life is bigger than the letter J. Do not let a symbol become more important than the God you believe is guiding you. Let the situation teach you surrender, not superstition. Let it teach you discernment, not obsession. Let it teach you peace, not fear. If something is leaving, let God handle the departure. If someone is pulling away, do not drag them back. If an opportunity disappears, do not humiliate yourself trying to recreate it. If communication becomes inconsistent, stop making excuses for inconsistency. If the door is closing, step back far enough to see whether God is standing behind it. Maybe He is. Maybe what feels like distance is actually divine protection. Maybe the closed door is preventing you from entering a situation that would have cost you far more than you realize. Maybe God knows what you would have discovered 6 months from now. Maybe He knows the betrayal you never saw coming. Maybe He knows the disappointment. Maybe He knows the compromise. Maybe He knows how much of yourself you would have lost trying to make it work. And perhaps His mercy is arriving in a form you did not recognize. Sometimes mercy looks like a door closing. Sometimes mercy looks like unanswered messages. Sometimes mercy looks like plans falling apart. Sometimes mercy looks like someone revealing that they cannot meet you where you are going. Sometimes mercy looks like God allowing something to end before it becomes more painful. Chosen one, you have prayed for protection. Do not complain when protection does not look like the picture you had in your mind. You prayed for God to remove what was not meant for you. Now something is being removed. You prayed for clarity. Now the truth is becoming visible. You prayed for alignment. Now misalignment is becoming uncomfortable. You prayed for peace. Now God is separating you from what disturbed your peace. Do not mistake the answer to your prayer for the loss of your desire. Sometimes God answers by taking away what you asked Him to protect you from. And yes, it may hurt. Let it hurt. You do not have to pretend that surrender is painless. You can grieve and still trust. You can cry and still believe. You can miss someone and still walk away. You can feel disappointed and still say, God, I trust your plan more than my preference. That is not weakness. That is strength. Because anyone can hold on to what feels good. It takes courage to release what feels familiar when you sense that God is calling you forward. And maybe the reason this door has been so difficult to release is because you have confused familiarity with destiny. You know this person. You know this environment. You know this routine. You know what to expect. The future, however, is unknown. And the unknown can feel frightening. But God often asks you to leave the familiar before He reveals the new. Abraham had to leave what he knew. The Israelites had to leave Egypt before they reached the promised land. Peter had to step out of the boat before he experienced what faith could do on the water. And you may have to leave a familiar door before you discover what is waiting beyond it. You cannot enter the new while constantly trying to reopen the old. You cannot fully embrace the next chapter while rereading the previous one every night. You cannot receive new instructions while arguing with the last instruction. And you cannot walk forward while your heart remains parked at a door God is closing. So take your hands off the handle. Stop forcing it. Stop trying to make people act differently. Stop trying to control outcomes. Stop interpreting every silence as an invitation to try again. Sometimes silence is simply silence. Sometimes no is simply no. Sometimes closed is closed. And when God is involved, you do not need to break the door down to prove that you belong inside. The right door will not require you to destroy yourself to enter. The right relationship will not require you to beg for basic respect. The right opportunity will not require you to become someone you were never meant to be. The right path may challenge you, but it will not require you to live in constant desperation. Chosen one, you are entering a season where discernment matters more than desire. You must learn to recognize the difference between what you want and what is good for you. You must learn to recognize the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between attention and intention, between opportunity and assignment, between attachment and alignment, between waiting on God and waiting on someone who has already shown you that they are not coming. That last distinction may be especially important, because sometimes people call it faith when they are actually refusing to accept reality. They say, "God told me to wait," when what they really mean is, "I do not want to let go." Be honest with yourself. Ask God to expose the difference. If you are waiting, wait in peace. If you are waiting in panic, obsessively checking your phone, analyzing every message, searching for signs, and constantly wondering whether you should reach out again, that may not be peaceful faith. That may be emotional attachment. And God does not need you to live in bondage to uncertainty. You can surrender the person. You can surrender the outcome. You can surrender the timeline. You can surrender the letter. You can surrender the entire story and say, "Lord, if this is for me, you know how to bring it back without me forcing it. If it is not for me, give me the strength to release it completely." That prayer creates freedom, because now you are no longer responsible for making the door open. You are responsible for following God, that is all. And if the door opens again someday, you can evaluate it with wisdom. You do not have to decide today what tomorrow will mean. If someone returns, let their actions speak. If an opportunity returns, examine whether the circumstances have changed. If the relationship returns, ask whether the patterns have changed. Do not reopen a door simply because you miss what was behind it. Ask whether what is behind it has changed. Because nostalgia can make you forget why you needed to leave. Loneliness can make you romanticize what once hurt you. Fear can make you call familiar pain love. But God can give you eyes to see beyond your emotions. And perhaps that is what He is doing right now. He is teaching you not to chase. He is teaching you not to force. He is teaching you not to settle. He is teaching you to trust. Chosen one, there is something powerful about becoming comfortable with God's no. Most people celebrate God's yes. They celebrate the open doors. They celebrate the answered prayers. They celebrate the unexpected opportunities. But mature faith also learns how to worship when the answer is no. Because a no can protect you, a no can redirect you, a no can mature you, a no can save you, a no can create space. And sometimes the no you cried over becomes the reason you eventually thank God. So if something connected to J is ending, do not immediately declare that your story is over. Perhaps one chapter is closing. Perhaps God is clearing your calendar. Perhaps He is clearing your heart. Perhaps He is clearing your environment. Perhaps He is making room for something that cannot enter while you are still holding on to what has expired. You cannot fill a cup that you refuse to empty. You cannot receive a new assignment while insisting on keeping the old one. You cannot fully appreciate what is coming while constantly comparing it to what left. There is a season for holding. There is a season for releasing. And wisdom is knowing which season you are in. If you have been holding on for too long, maybe today is the day you loosen your grip. Not because you stopped caring. Not because it never mattered. Not because you suddenly have every answer, but because you trust God more than you trust your fear. You trust that what He removes can be replaced. You trust that what He closes can lead to something greater. You trust that your future does not depend on one person. You trust that your purpose does not depend on one opportunity. You trust that your identity does not depend on who chooses you. You trust that God's plan does not collapse because one door closed. And you trust that if something truly belongs in your future, God does not need you to manipulate it into existence. Chosen one, there is peace on the other side of surrender. You may not feel it immediately. At first, there may be grief. There may be silence. There may be questions. There may be days when you wonder if you made the right decision. But keep walking. Do not run back simply because the new road feels unfamiliar. Do not return to the old door just because the hallway ahead is dark. Sometimes you have to take a few steps before the light becomes visible. Sometimes the next instruction comes after obedience to the previous one. Sometimes the provision appears after you release the attachment. And sometimes the greatest evidence that you have healed is not that you stopped remembering. It is that you stopped chasing. You remember, but you no longer run. You care, but you no longer beg. You love, but you no longer abandon yourself. You remember the door, but you no longer stand outside it waiting for someone to let you in. You keep moving. You keep praying. You keep trusting. And one day, you may look back and realize that the door you thought was closing against you was actually closing behind you. It was not God shutting you out. It was God shutting something off. Something that could no longer accompany you into the next season. Something that had completed its purpose. Something that belonged to a version of you that you are becoming too mature to remain. And when that realization comes, you will understand why forcing it would have been a mistake. You will understand why the messages went unanswered, why the opportunity disappeared, why the connection became complicated, why your peace started leaving every time you tried to make it work, why your spirit kept telling you to pause, why every attempt to force the situation created another obstacle. You will realize that God was not punishing you. He was protecting your path, and perhaps today, the only thing you need to do is stop fighting the closing door. Let it close. Let the season end. Let the silence speak. Let God have the final word, because what God has for you will not require you to destroy your dignity to obtain it. And if you are standing at that door right now, tempted to knock one more time, tempted to send one more message, tempted to make one more explanation, tempted to force one more conversation, pause before you do it. Ask God first. Is this faith or is this fear? Am I being led? Or am I trying to control? Am I waiting on you? Or am I waiting on a person? Am I honoring your direction? Or am I defending my attachment? Those questions may be uncomfortable, but sometimes discomfort is the beginning of clarity. And when you finally become still enough to hear what God has been saying beneath all the noise, you may realize that the instruction was never complicated. It was simply this: stop forcing the door. Release what you cannot control. Trust what you cannot see. Walk away when God says walk away, and keep your heart open for whatever He chooses to place in front of you next. Because the closed door is not the end of your story. It may be the boundary between who you were and who you are becoming. And if J is part of what God is asking you to release, then release it without hatred, without revenge, without bitterness, and without needing to prove anything. Bless what you can bless. Learn what you can learn. Forgive what you can forgive. And leave the rest with God. You do not need to carry the weight of an ending that God Himself may be using to make you lighter. You do not need to understand every detail. You only need enough faith for the next step. And the next step may not be toward that door. The next step may be away from it. The next step may be into silence. The next step may be into healing. The next step may be into preparation. The next step may be toward the person you are becoming. The next step may be toward an opportunity you have not even heard about yet. The next step may be toward a version of your life that would have been impossible if you had remained attached to what God was trying to remove. So breathe, chosen one. Do not panic. Do not chase. Do not force. Do not beg. Do not allow temporary loneliness to convince you that you need permanent attachment. Let God close what needs to close. Let Him remove what needs to be removed. Let Him rearrange what needs to be rearranged. And when the door finally closes completely, do not spend your life staring at it wondering who walked through it without you. Turn around, look ahead, because there is more to your journey than the door you lost, and there is more to your future than the name you are trying so hard to understand. Because there is more to your journey than the door you lost, and there is more to your future than the name you are trying so hard to understand. Chosen one, sometimes the hardest thing God asks you to do is nothing, not because nothing is happening, but because something is happening that you cannot control. You want to move. You want to fix, you want to explain, you want to reach out, you want to know what they are thinking, you want to know whether they miss you, you want to know whether they regret what happened, you want to know whether the situation can still be repaired. But God may be saying, be still, and being still can feel unbearable when your heart is used to action. You may believe that if you do something, anything, you can change the outcome. But sometimes your greatest obedience is refusing to interfere. Sometimes the miracle is happening while you are sitting still. Sometimes the separation is doing work that your conversation never could. Sometimes distance is allowing truth to become visible, and sometimes God needs you to step out of the way because you have been trying to carry a situation that belongs in His hands. Chosen one, you cannot control another person's heart. You cannot force another person's maturity. You cannot force another person's honesty. You cannot force another person's commitment. You cannot force someone to recognize your value. You cannot force someone to become ready. And you certainly cannot force God to keep something in your life simply because you are afraid of losing it. There is freedom in accepting that. You are not responsible for making everything work. You are responsible for your response. You are responsible for your integrity. You are responsible for your obedience. You are responsible for protecting the peace God has given you. And if someone connected to J has become a source of constant confusion, you do not have to keep living in confusion simply because you once experienced connection. The past does not automatically authorize the future. Just because someone had access to you yesterday does not mean they deserve access to you tomorrow. Just because something once felt right does not mean it remains right. Just because you prayed for something does not mean you must hold on to it forever. People sometimes pray for God to give them something, and when circumstances begin changing, they become angry with God for taking it away. But perhaps God never intended for you to possess it permanently. Perhaps He allowed it for a season. Perhaps there was something you needed to learn. Perhaps there was something inside you that needed to awaken. Perhaps that relationship introduced you to a part of yourself you had never seen. Perhaps that opportunity taught you discipline. Perhaps that disappointment taught you boundaries. Perhaps that rejection taught you dependence on God. Perhaps that person was never supposed to be your destination. Perhaps they were simply part of the journey. And there is nothing wrong with acknowledging that. You do not have to make someone a villain just because they are no longer part of your future. You do not have to hate what you once loved. You do not have to destroy the memories. You simply have to recognize the season. A season can be beautiful and still be temporary. A chapter can be meaningful and still end. A connection can be genuine and still not be permanent. This is one of the hardest truths to accept because human beings naturally want permanence. We want guarantees. We want certainty. We want to know that what we have today will still be ours tomorrow. But life does not work that way, and faith does not work that way either. Faith requires you to trust God when circumstances change. It requires you to believe that His goodness is not dependent upon your circumstances remaining familiar. Chosen one, maybe you are being asked to trust God in a completely different way, not by believing that He will keep everything exactly as you want it, but by believing that He will guide you even when things change. That is deeper faith. It is easy to trust when the door is open. It is harder to trust when the door is closing. It is easy to praise when you receive what you asked for. It is harder to praise when God gives you something different. But there is a strength that develops when you stop demanding that God explain Himself before you obey. You begin to understand that His wisdom is greater than your perspective. You begin to realize that what you can see is limited. You see today's pain. God sees tomorrow's consequence. You see today's loneliness. God sees tomorrow's relationship. You see today's disappointment. God sees tomorrow's opportunity. You see the person leaving. God sees the version of you that will emerge after the departure. That is why you must stop measuring God's goodness by what He allows to remain. Sometimes His goodness is revealed by what He refuses to let remain. Chosen one, if you have been asking for clarity, pay attention to patterns. Not every sign is supernatural. Sometimes the answer is simply in the pattern. If something repeatedly produces confusion, pay attention. If something repeatedly requires you to chase, pay attention. If something repeatedly causes you to compromise your values, pay attention. If someone repeatedly disappears and returns without changing, pay attention. If you repeatedly lose your peace every time you become connected to a particular situation, pay attention. You do not need a dramatic sign in the sky to recognize a pattern that has been repeating in front of you. Wisdom sometimes looks ordinary. It looks like observing. It looks like listening. It looks like not making excuses. It looks like admitting, this is not working. That sentence can be difficult, especially when you have invested time, especially when you have invested emotions, especially when you have prayed, especially when you have told other people about the future you imagined. But investment does not mean obligation. You do not have to keep paying for something simply because you already spent something on it. You do not have to remain in a situation because leaving would mean admitting that it did not become what you hoped it would become. You are allowed to change direction. You are allowed to say, I thought this was where I was going, but now I understand that God is leading me somewhere else. There is no shame in that. In fact, there is wisdom in it. Chosen one, do not allow pride to keep you standing at a closed door. Sometimes pride says, I need this to work because I already told everyone it would. But God is not asking you to protect your reputation. He is asking you to protect your purpose. People may not understand your decision. Let them misunderstand. People may ask why you stopped. You do not owe everyone an explanation. People may say you gave up too soon. They were not inside the situation. They did not carry the weight you carried. They did not hear the prayers you prayed. They did not experience the things you experienced. You do not need public approval to obey private conviction. If God is teaching you to walk away, you do not need a committee meeting. You need courage. And courage does not mean you feel no fear. Courage means fear does not get the final decision. Chosen one, maybe you have been afraid that if you release, you will never find another connection that feels as strong. That fear is understandable, but you cannot build your future around the assumption that the best thing you will ever experience has already happened. That belief is not faith. That is scarcity. And scarcity makes people hold on to things God is asking them to release. You may have convinced yourself that this was your one chance, your one person, your one opportunity, your one possibility. But God is not limited to one door. God is not limited to one individual. God is not limited to one city. God is not limited to one job. God is not limited to one relationship. God is not limited by the timeline you created in your mind. What you call your only option may simply be the only option you have seen so far. There is a difference. Your vision is limited. God's is not. You see the current landscape. God sees beyond the horizon. You see what is available today. God sees what can become available tomorrow. And sometimes he closes what you know because he wants to introduce you to what you do not know. That is why you cannot worship familiarity. You have to trust possibility. Chosen one, there is also something you need to understand about timing. Sometimes the door is not closing because the person or opportunity is evil. Sometimes it is closing because the timing is wrong. But even then, you should not force it. If something is genuinely meant to return, you do not need to destroy yourself trying to preserve it. God knows how to restore what belongs in your life. You do not need to become the manager of every outcome. You can surrender. And surrender does not mean passivity in every area. It means you stop trying to control what belongs to God. You can still work. You can still prepare. You can still grow. You can still make wise decisions. You can still communicate honestly when communication is appropriate. But after you have done what is right, you release the outcome. You do not obsess over it. You do not manipulate it. You do not repeatedly revisit it. You do not create drama just to keep the connection alive. You let reality speak, and reality will always speak eventually. People reveal themselves. Time reveals motives. Distance reveals priorities. Pressure reveals character. Success reveals humility. Loss reveals attachment. And silence reveals what words were hiding. That is why you should not be afraid of time. Let time show you. You do not need to force an answer that time is already preparing to reveal. Chosen one, perhaps your biggest struggle right now is that you want closure. You want the perfect conversation. You want someone to explain why they changed. You want them to admit what they did. You want them to apologize. You want them to say they were wrong. You want them to recognize what they lost. But closure does not always come from another person's mouth. Sometimes closure comes from your own acceptance. You may never receive the explanation you imagined. You may never hear the words you wanted. You may never understand every motive, but you can still move forward. You can still heal. You can still forgive. You can still become whole. You can still stop waiting. You can still close the door from your side. That does not mean you are bitter. It means you are done allowing unanswered questions to control your future. And perhaps God is teaching you that your peace cannot depend upon someone else's ability to communicate. Your peace has to be rooted deeper than that. If they explain, you can listen. If they apologize, you can decide what forgiveness looks like. If they return, you can evaluate. But until then, you do not have to live suspended in anticipation. You are allowed to live. You are allowed to laugh again. You are allowed to build again. You are allowed to dream again. You are allowed to meet new people. You are allowed to pursue new opportunities. You are allowed to become excited about your future without feeling guilty about what ended. Chosen one, do not put your entire life on pause because one door closed. That is not loyalty. That is stagnation. You were not created to remain frozen at an old chapter. You were created to grow, and growth often requires movement. You cannot keep looking behind you and expect to see what is ahead. At some point, you have to turn. At some point, you have to step. At some point, you have to say, I am not going to force what God is closing. When you say that, mean it. Do not say it today and reach out tomorrow because you feel lonely. Do not say you are surrendering and then spend 6 hours checking their social media. Do not say you are releasing them while asking everyone else what they think the person is doing. Do not say you trust God while constantly trying to gather evidence that your desired outcome is still possible. That is not release. That is attachment wearing religious language. Be honest with yourself. If you need to grieve, grieve. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to sit quietly and pray, pray. But let the grief move through you instead of allowing it to become a reason to go backward. Chosen one, there is a difference between grieving a door and trying to reopen it. You can grieve what you hoped it would become. You can grieve the future you imagined. You can grieve the plans you made. You can grieve the version of yourself that existed in that season. But after grief comes choice, and your choice is whether you will remain emotionally attached to an ending or allow God to use the ending to transform you. Do not waste the lesson. If the experience taught you that you ignored red flags, learn. If it taught you that you abandoned your boundaries, learn. If it taught you that you were seeking validation, learn. If it taught you that you were afraid of being alone, learn. If it taught you that you were placing another person above yourself, learn. If it taught you that you were confusing attention with love, learn. The lesson can become the blessing. You can come out of this wiser. You can become more discerning. You can become more grounded. You can become more confident. You can become less desperate for approval. You can become more comfortable saying no. You can become more willing to walk away from inconsistency. You can become more protective of your peace. And perhaps this is part of what God is doing through the closing door. He is not only removing something, He is developing someone. He is developing you. The version of you that tolerated everything because you were afraid to lose someone cannot enter every season of your future. The version of you that constantly chased validation cannot carry the confidence required for the next chapter. The version of you that ignored your intuition cannot make wise decisions in unfamiliar territory. The version of you that begged for doors to open cannot recognize the significance of a door that God opens effortlessly. So perhaps the closing door is connected to your transformation. Perhaps it is forcing you to become someone who no longer needs to force. Chosen one, think about that. What if the real miracle is not getting J back? What if the real miracle is becoming the person who no longer needs J to validate your future? What if the breakthrough is not reconciliation? What if the breakthrough is freedom? What if the blessing is not another conversation? What if the blessing is peace? What if the answer is not, they are coming back? What if the answer is, you are coming back to yourself? Because sometimes you can become so focused on another person that you lose contact with your own dreams. You stop asking what you want. You stop asking where you are going. You stop asking what God is building in you. Your entire emotional world begins revolving around someone else's behavior. If they text, you are happy. If they disappear, you are devastated. If they return, you have hope. If they pull away, you collapse. That is too much power to give another human being. Chosen one, take your emotional authority back. Your peace cannot depend on someone's notification. Your worth cannot depend on someone's attention. Your confidence cannot depend on someone's approval. Your future cannot depend on someone's decision. You are still you when they leave. You are still worthy when they reject you. You are still valuable when they misunderstand you. You are still called to grow when someone chooses another path. And you are still capable of becoming everything God created you to become. That is why you must not make a permanent home out of temporary rejection. Let it pass through. Let it teach you, let it strengthen you. But do not let it define you. Chosen one, there is another trap you need to avoid: revenge. When a door closes, sometimes the wounded heart wants the other person to regret it. You want them to see you succeed. You want them to come back and realize what they lost. You want them to watch you become everything they could not recognize. But be careful. If your entire healing process is built around making someone regret losing you, then they still control your emotional life. You are still living for their reaction. True freedom is when you no longer need them to regret anything. You simply become healthy. You become whole. You become peaceful. You become focused. You become disciplined. You become closer to God. You become more aligned with your purpose. And whether they notice or not becomes irrelevant. That is freedom. You do not need to win the breakup. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to create a performance of your healing. Heal privately. Grow privately. Pray privately. Build privately. Let God develop you without needing an audience. Because sometimes the strongest transformation happens in silence. Nobody sees the nights you cried. Nobody sees the prayers you whispered. Nobody sees the moments you wanted to go back but chose not to. Nobody sees the discipline it took to stop checking. Nobody sees the courage it took to delete the message you almost sent. Nobody sees the strength it took to choose peace over another argument. But God sees. And that is enough. Chosen one, every time you choose not to force the door, you are practicing trust. Every time you choose not to chase, you are practicing self-respect. Every time you choose not to compromise your values, you are practicing alignment. Every time you choose peace over confusion, you are practicing wisdom. And every time you surrender the outcome to God, you are practicing faith. It may not feel dramatic. It may not feel like a breakthrough, but small acts of obedience can completely change the direction of a life. One decision can create a new pattern. One boundary can end a cycle. One surrender can open your eyes. One step away can lead you toward a completely different future. So do not underestimate what is happening in this quiet season. The door may be closing, but your life is not closing. The connection may be ending, but your capacity to love is not ending. The opportunity may be disappearing, but your potential is not disappearing. The plan may be changing, but your purpose is not disappearing. And the person may be walking away, but God is not walking away from you. That is what you must remember. When everything familiar begins shifting, you may feel abandoned, but change does not equal abandonment. Sometimes God is closer in the transition than you realize. You may not recognize His presence because you were expecting Him to preserve what you loved. Instead, He may be guiding you through the process of releasing it. And that process can be holy too. There is holiness in letting go. There is holiness in choosing peace. There is holiness in admitting that something is no longer working. There is holiness in saying, God, I wanted this, but I want your will more. That is a powerful prayer. Not because it guarantees that you will get what you want, but because it places your heart in a position where you can receive whatever comes next without resentment. Chosen one, perhaps you are being prepared for a future that requires a lighter heart. You cannot carry every old relationship into every new season. You cannot carry every old expectation. You cannot carry every old wound. You cannot carry every old fear. At some point, you have to put some things down. And perhaps J represents more than a person. Perhaps it represents an entire pattern. A pattern of chasing. A pattern of overthinking. A pattern of seeking validation. A pattern of staying too long. A pattern of ignoring your own needs. A pattern of hoping someone will change. A pattern of believing that love must be earned through suffering. If that is what the situation has exposed, then do not only release the person, release the pattern. Because if you release one person but carry the same pattern into the next relationship, you will recreate the same pain with a different name. God may be closing a door because He wants you to stop repeating what happens behind it. He wants you to learn. He wants you to mature. He wants you to recognize what you previously overlooked. He wants you to understand that your standards are not too high simply because someone could not meet them. He wants you to know that boundaries are not cruelty. He wants you to know that saying no is not selfish. He wants you to know that walking away is not always failure. Sometimes walking away is the evidence that you finally listened. Chosen one. There will come a moment when you no longer ask, "Why did they leave?" You will ask, "Why did I stay so long?" Not with shame, with understanding. You will look back at yourself with compassion. You will recognize the version of you that was trying to make something work because you wanted to believe in it. You will recognize the part of you that was afraid. You will recognize the part of you that was hopeful. And instead of judging that person, you will thank them for surviving. Then you will teach them something new. You will teach yourself that love does not require self-abandonment. You will teach yourself that faith does not require denial. You will teach yourself that hope does not require obsession. You will teach yourself that patience does not mean tolerating everything. You will teach yourself that forgiveness does not mean unlimited access. You will teach yourself that moving on does not mean what happened was meaningless. And that is when your heart begins to mature. Chosen one, do not be afraid of becoming more discerning. Some people will call you cold because you no longer tolerate what you used to tolerate. Some people will say you changed. You did. That is the point. Growth should change you. Healing should change you. Wisdom should change you. You should not be the same person after every lesson. The pain should produce wisdom. The disappointment should produce discernment. The ending should produce maturity. The closed door should produce direction. And if it does, then the experience did not destroy you. It developed you. You are learning to stop asking, "How do I keep this?" and start asking, "Is this still aligned with where God is taking me?" That question will save you years. Because sometimes you can spend years preserving something that was only supposed to last months. You can spend years trying to revive something that completed its purpose long ago. You can spend years waiting for someone to become who you imagine them to be. And eventually, you realize that you were not waiting for the person. You were waiting for your fantasy of the person. That realization can hurt, but it can also set you free. Chosen one, let reality be reality. Do not fall in love with potential while ignoring patterns. Do not fall in love with promises while ignoring actions. Do not fall in love with memories while ignoring the present. Do not fall in love with what could be while refusing to accept what is. God works with truth. Healing begins with truth. Freedom begins with truth. And sometimes the truth is simply that something has changed. Maybe Jay has changed. Maybe you have changed. Maybe the circumstances have changed. Maybe the season has changed. Whatever the reason, you do not have to fight the fact that change has occurred. You can acknowledge it. You can grieve it. And you can move with it. Because resistance does not stop change. It only makes change more painful. Think about a river. Water does not fight every stone. It moves around it. It keeps going. It adapts. It continues toward its destination. You need that kind of spiritual flexibility. When the path changes, adjust. When the door closes, look for direction. When the relationship ends, look inward. When the opportunity disappears, prepare for another. When the plan changes, surrender the plan without surrendering your purpose. That distinction matters. Your plan can change. Your purpose can remain. Your relationship can end. Your capacity to love can remain. Your opportunity can disappear. Your ability to create can remain. Your location can change. Your calling can remain. Your circumstances can change. God can still be faithful. Chosen one, never confuse the changing landscape with a changing God. You may not understand what He is doing. You may not like what He is doing. You may wish He had chosen differently. But you can still trust Him. Trust does not mean pretending everything feels good. Trust means believing that your limited perspective is not the final authority. And perhaps this season is teaching you to live without needing constant confirmation. You do not need 10 signs. You do not need 20 coincidences. You do not need someone else's opinion. You need wisdom. You need prayer. You need honesty. You need patience. You need the courage to accept what reality is showing you. And if the door connected to J continues closing, do not keep rebuilding the doorway. Let it close. Let God decide what belongs on the other side. Maybe there is a new relationship. Maybe there is a new assignment. Maybe there is a new environment. Maybe there is a new opportunity. Maybe there is a deeper level of healing. Maybe there is simply a season of solitude where you finally hear your own thoughts again. Do not underestimate solitude. Solitude is not always loneliness. Sometimes solitude is preparation. Sometimes God removes the noise so you can hear the instruction. Sometimes He removes the crowd so you can recognize yourself. Sometimes he removes the relationship so you can rediscover your identity. Sometimes he removes the distraction so you can focus. And if you find yourself alone after the door closes, do not immediately assume something has gone wrong. Ask what this quiet season is trying to teach you. What are you avoiding? What are you afraid to face? What dream did you put aside? What part of yourself did you silence to keep someone else comfortable? What boundaries did you abandon? What did you tolerate because you were afraid of losing the connection? What would your life look like if you stopped negotiating against yourself? Those questions can open doors inside you that no external relationship ever could. Chosen one, maybe the door closing is not simply about leaving someone. Maybe it is about returning to yourself, returning to your values, returning to your purpose, returning to your discipline, returning to your prayer life, returning to your peace, returning to the dreams you had before you became consumed with another person's behavior, returning to the version of you that believed there was more to life than one connection. That version of you is still there. You have not lost them. You just have to choose them again. And that choice may begin with something very simple. Stop forcing what is not flowing. Stop chasing what is withdrawing. Stop explaining what should already be clear. Stop begging for what should be freely given. Stop abandoning your peace for temporary connection. Stop allowing fear to convince you that an ending means your life is over. It does not. An ending is an ending. It is not your identity. It is not your destiny. It is not your entire story. And perhaps, chosen one, what you call a closed door is actually a divine interruption. You were going one way. God may be redirecting you. You were investing in one thing. God may be protecting your resources. You were attaching yourself to one person. God may be protecting your heart. You were building one future. God may be preparing another. You were asking for one answer. God may be giving you a completely different kind of blessing. So do not rush to label this season as loss. Wait, watch, pray, learn, grow. Let time reveal what emotion cannot. And as you move through these days, remember that you do not have to force an outcome to prove that you have faith. Sometimes faith looks like releasing the outcome entirely. Sometimes faith is saying, if the door closes, I will not break it down. Sometimes faith is saying, if they leave, I will not chase them. Sometimes faith is saying, if the opportunity disappears, I will not assume my future disappeared with it. Sometimes faith is saying, if I do not understand today, I will still trust God today. And sometimes the strongest prayer is not, God, make this happen. It is, God, make me willing to accept whatever you know is best. That prayer may lead you somewhere unexpected. It may take you through a season you never planned. It may require you to release things you thought were permanent, but it can also lead you into a peace that cannot be purchased by getting everything you want. Because peace is not the absence of uncertainty. Peace is knowing who holds you while you move through uncertainty. And chosen one, you are learning that now. You are learning that you can survive unanswered questions. You can survive someone's absence. You can survive a closed door. You can survive disappointment. You can survive the end of a chapter. You can survive the uncertainty of the next chapter. You can survive the moment when the thing you wanted does not happen. And more importantly, you can still become everything you were meant to become. You can still rise. You can still build. You can still love. You can still laugh. You can still dream. You can still trust. You can still believe. The closing door does not have the authority to cancel your future. And if God is closing it, you do not have to keep your hand on the handle. Release it. Let your hands become free. Because you cannot receive what God is placing into your hands while you are still gripping what He is asking you to surrender. You cannot carry yesterday into tomorrow without eventually becoming exhausted. So put it down. Put the name down. Put the expectation down. Put the fantasy down. Put the fear down. Put the need for an explanation down. Put the need to be chosen by that particular person down. And pick up your peace. Pick up your dignity. Pick up your purpose. Pick up your faith. Pick up the vision God placed inside you before this situation ever appeared. There was a you before J. There will be a you after J. And the person you become afterward may be stronger, wiser, calmer, and more discerning than the person who entered that situation. Do not be afraid of that person. Become that person. Chosen one, you may feel that something is being taken from you, but perhaps something is also being given. Perspective, wisdom, freedom, time, space, clarity, strength. And sometimes what is given is worth more than what was taken. Sometimes the greatest gift is the ability to see clearly, because confusion can keep you attached. Clarity can set you free. And when clarity comes, you may no longer need to ask whether the door should remain open. You will simply know that your next move is not to force it. Your next move is to turn. Your next move is to walk. Your next move is to trust. And as you walk, you may discover that the road ahead has been waiting for you longer than you realized.